welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk about being on the downward slope of this recent transition that my fiance and I have gone through. So we recently moved up here to New York, currently living in Queens. For the past few years we've been in Atlanta, Georgia. Our family is there. She was working there. I had a great job there, but Kenya got into a general surgery program here in New York, and so we made the decision together to make this move. We could have done long distance. Breaking up wasn't an option, but although it isn't our ideal plan, we both made the decision to come up here and make the best of it. So she's going to spend the next 5 years in residency. I'm starting a master's program in general psychology starting in September. So the next 2 months, I have a lot of free time. And so my plan is just to run, work out, focus on content creation, and read and learn as much as I can before school starts. And so it's these transition points that make me reflect, perhaps make most people reflect on the things that they didn't attend to properly, or the things that they took for granted. And what I particularly want to focus on in this video is my career. So my last transition point, I would say, in life was 2021, when I decided to get out of the Marine Corps. I also started talking to Kenya, my now fiance. I was going to make the move back to Atlanta from North Carolina, where I was stationed, and I was going to find a corporate job. And so at that point in my life, I knew that, or I felt that the Marine Corps was a little too restricting, and I was ready to try to establish a solid relationship. And I felt like I couldn't do that while being long distance, and I really liked and was interested in Kenya, and so I wanted to invest more in that domain of my life. So I made the decision to move to Georgia, which meant that I had to get a job. Luckily, I was able to get accepted into a military fellowship program, which is basically an internship that's sponsored by the DoD for the Home Depot. In this internship, I didn't do too much because I was also still active duty in the Marine Corps. For any transitioning military members out there, I highly recommend that you look into skill bridge programs or other DoD sponsored programs where they offer different internships that you can get accepted to and start networking and learn different skills in the civilian side while still being active duty. Highly recommend if you can get into those programs that you do. And so during this military fellowship, or during this internship, for lack of a better term, I did a lot of networking. I was focused on moving back to Atlanta, and I developed interviewing skills, general interviewing skills, but also doing my best to cater my presentation to what hiring managers at the Home Depot were looking for. And again, that was one of the primary points of the military fellowship program. So that was about a 3-month program. Around April 2022, I had multiple offers from within the company at Home Depot, and I selected one, and I started full-time as a senior operations business analyst. Had no idea what that was. I was really ambivalent or agnostic about the subject matter of what I was going to be doing. My goal was just to not go too long without having a job. And so looking at my peers, looking at my friends and colleagues on the civilian side, corporate America seemed like the way to go. And so I got this job as a business analyst, and I immediately enjoyed the people who I began working with. I knew that I had so many obstacles as far as understanding the culture, as far as understanding the language and acronyms. Just, it seems like in any field there's going to be their own language or set of acronyms that you have to learn. And I know, talking with Kenya, she definitely understands this, and it seems it definitely was a thing in the Marine Corps. And then lo and behold, the same thing occurs or happened at Home Depot. And so first few months took a minute for me to get my bearings, but the people that I worked with were tremendously professional and uplifting and encouraging, and having pledged a fraternity in college and then having joined the Marine Corps and gone through that training, it was a different environment or cultural attitude to speak with your superiors and have them be encouraging 99% of the time. That's not to say that in the frat of the Marine Corps there are no leaders who encourage. It's just more so the type of, in the Marine Corps and in the fraternity, it's the type of love where they know you can do so much better, so they push you very, very hard, and they don't accept anything other than your best majority of the time. This was the opposite at Home Depot. And there's trade-offs to both styles of leadership, right? But the point is that this was a different way of following that I had to adjust to. So that's kind of a little bit of the background. I spent 2 years at the Home Depot. About majority of that time I was a business analyst, and then the past 7 months or so I was a process engineer working on a order fulfillment team, or the order fulfillment team. And so I had to understand everything that goes into a customer going onto the Home Depot application and placing an order for a hammer, and then how does that order get translated to or get transferred to a store, and how does the store see that information, and how do they pick up that hammer and either deliver it to the customer through our supply chain services, or how do we place that hammer somewhere in the store ready for the customer to come and pick it up. So all of those different dynamics I had to learn about, but that was primarily the part of the business that I focused on. I'm not going to spend too much time distinguishing between a business analyst and a process engineer, so I'm going to try to keep it a little more broad. But what I do want to hone in on is the type of problems that I worked on the order fulfillment team, the culture, the political culture within the Home Depot, which hopefully can shed insight on the political culture in most corporate companies. And then I want to talk about some principles that I think I learned with the Home Depot or were further solidified. So talking about the different problems that I worked with. The problems were definitely engaging and made me enthusiastic to come into work most days. And part of the reason was because I was able to see how these types of problems that we were dealing with transferred to many other things that I hope to engage with in the future. And so, when it comes to order fulfillment, how do we get things to different locations, or how do we intake information from customers and synthesize that and produce that into a digestible manner for our associates, who are the engineers, for lack of a better term, the technicians, the people actually doing the things and making the system run. To me, those topics or those problems are everywhere. They're ubiquitous, whether you can talk about healthcare, whether you talk about housing, or whether you talk about daycares. There's always information that has to be processed, and there's always sometimes there's applications that have to be utilized, and there's people that have to be incentivized to do the right things at the right time. Resource allocation was another obstacle that we had to continue to wrestle with. So all of these different issues relating to technology, relating to people, relating to logistics, and to have those problems and to have our capacity to solve those problems measured by various metrics, the main one being our bottom line, that was super helpful because it allowed us to see what was working and what wasn't working. And so to the degree that things weren't working, we saw that reflected, and we could then take those numbers and conduct some root cause analysis and go try to see, okay, what's the problem in this store, or what's the problem in this region, or what's the problem with this particular product. And so it forced us to ask many questions and go out into the stores and talk to the different associates, the people on the ground who are utilizing this process, and they tell us what's broken, and then we go cross-reference that with a store across town, and then we conduct some data analysis to see, okay, is what these associates saying being corroborated by the evidence from all 2,000 stores internationally, or is this just a local problem, or what have you. Thanks to the problems that I was tasked to solve and the culture and environment of failing fast in the Home Depot, I was able to learn how to ask the right questions, and when to sit back and listen, and when to pay more attention to certain people conducting the process this way compared to other people. I got to learn what a good process was and what a bad process was. I got to learn what are good metrics and what are bad metrics, and when it's appropriate to not worry about metrics, and when it's appropriate to measure success based off things that are somewhat intangible, such as customer experience or associate experience. And drilling in on that a little bit more, to understand what it means to have a good or bad customer or associate experience means that you have to develop some sense of empathy. That means you have to go out and engage with customers and engage with the associates. And maybe if you try to do a large scale sampling of how people are feeling, you can do surveys and questionnaires, but nothing in my short time with that company. And this is something that I felt also in the Marine Corps. Nothing beats going out to where the problem is and seeing it for yourself, and working through the process and seeing why there's friction, and doing your best to take all that information and turn it into a story to then tell to your leadership to convince them to fix this problem. And so I'm very thankful for all the problems that I had to engage with, and the things that I was forced to learn, because I feel like they're definitely generalizable. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the political culture of the Home Depot. And for more context, Home Depot, hundreds of thousands of employees, like I mentioned earlier, 2,000 stores internationally. I worked in the corporate building, which is based out of Atlanta, Georgia, and maybe there's about 1,000 or so, or a couple, maybe less than 10,000 corporate associates, and so I make up a small part of the company, and so I can't extrapolate too far. These are just some general themes that I noticed that don't seem too unreasonable to claim. So when I think about politics, I think about the system for allocating resources and authority. It's a very broad definition, but I'm still working through exactly what it means. We use this word quite frequently, or at least I hear it quite frequently, and we say that, it seems to be a catch-all for any time there's not a simple answer, or any time there's not a simple discussion that needs to be had. And so I'm going to use that working definition for now. Politics defined as the system of allocating resources and authority. And up until recently, I've been very cynical about politics. And so particularly within this company, what I mean by the politics of the company is that people will have different goals, and we all have the sub goal supposedly, or the ultimate goal supposedly, of making the most amount of money possible. But many people have different sub goals that influence their decision making, and perhaps bias them towards making a decision that is better for their goal but not better for the overall goal. And that can come up when we're talking about different projects, when we're talking about different problems that we need to solve. Where are we going to spend our bandwidth? Where are we going to spend our time and energy? Let's say we're getting an intern for a few months. Okay, we're going to need to give them a project. What project do we want them to work on? Because there's always problems. There's always more problems than we're ever going to be able to manage. And so the question then becomes a prioritization question. And I think that the proper way to prioritize problems is based off return on investment. Okay, how much money is this problem losing for us, and then how much would it cost for us to solve this problem. And it's not a perfect science, but at least in my opinion that's a reasonable way of prioritizing problems. And so anything outside of that framework of prioritization makes me think that there are alternate different motives that people have in mind when they're making this decision, or worse, perhaps they're arbitrary reasons for making the decisions that they have. And that's what I mean by political. Moving forward or making decisions without the ultimate goal in mind, particularly if instead of the ultimate goal you have a self-promoting goal in mind, for example. So I encountered that a lot over the 2 years that I worked with the company, and I definitely admit that I'm ignorant in many domains, and politics is one of them. When you have a large organization such as the Home Depot, and you have you have a complex system such as our supply chain system, and that's just one aspect of the Home Depot, I understand that politics is necessary, and I understand that the larger and the more complex an organization, the less visibility into every single decision everyone will have. And I don't think anyone would want that anyway. I'll sum up. There were just two aspects of the political culture within the company that I felt was an impediment for me personally to do my job, but perhaps was an impediment for the organization as a whole. So the first was too much top-down authority. It's my belief that there's this book called The E-Myth by Michael Gerber, and he talks about how in every organization, in every business, there's at least 3 roles. You have the visionary, who's the entrepreneur, you have the manager, and then you have the technician. The manager, of course, is a liaison between the entrepreneur, the visionary, and between the technician, the person on the ground performing the actual duties that make the money. It's my belief that the technicians should be the ones to drive most of the change and the influence. They are the ones on the ground. So in the case of Home Depot, these are our field associates, the ones in the stores, the ones that you guys see, if you're ever shopping in the Home Depot with their orange aprons, the cashiers, the lumber associates, and then the supply chain warehouse associates, who are getting all the product into the stores or who are getting the product delivered to you. And these men and women are the ones who are dealing with the problems at the level at the transaction level, where we care, where the rubber meets the road. And so I do think that in general the Home Depot did a good job of getting feedback from the field, but that feedback didn't always translate to what we at the corporate office cared about and worked on. There were very few times where the CEO, and this is again credit to Home Depot, where the CEO was out in the stores asking for feedback, and once he got feedback from the technicians, those associates on the ground, it turned into an immediate executive order, which is kind of a contradiction from what I'm saying, but it turned into an immediate executive order to the rest of the company, or to many teams at the corporate office, where for the next 6 months our sole job, in large part, was to fix that problem that the CEO heard about. And so that's an interesting combination of that bottom-up feedback, but then that top-down execution. And I honestly don't mind that too much. I think that's preferable to the top-down authority that is not influenced by the technicians or those associates on the ground. And so too much top-down authority is something that I'm wary of when it comes to large organizations, where you can't possibly, those at the top, they can't possibly know everything that's going on. And so they need to rely on the distributed information that's at the lower levels of the organization. The next aspect of politics is something that I mentioned earlier. It's just people going out for themselves, and that's probably something that might not be a problem that's idiosyncratic to the political landscape. That could just be human nature. But to the degree that a organization is not meritocratic, I think it enables that type of thinking and decision making, where if an organization is meritocratic, then whatever traits or actions lead to the attainment of the ultimate goal, and to the degree that people adhere to those traits and principles and types of decisions, they'll get promoted and they'll get rewarded. And anyone who is not aiming at that ultimate goal in a meritocratic organization, they'll get left behind. And so I think that when you see people get promoted when they don't need to, or when you see people get rewarded for making decisions that are not good for the company, I think that's where you could see things start to get shaky, and you start to ask certain questions and try to understand what's really going on, if the goal isn't just to make money. So that's the political landscape. And now a few principles that I'll just try to sum up quickly, that I feel like do a good job of illustrating what I've learned or what I really saw in my 2 years working at Home Depot. The first would be, whenever you're tackling a complex problem, you need a clear goal and a way to measure that goal. One of the great books that I read while at the Home Depot was The Goal by Eli Goldratt, and I highly recommend anyone who's interested in, I would say, problem solving in general, read that book. But this kind of goes back to what I said earlier. In my perhaps naive paradigm of how organizations should operate, specifically, for-profit organizations, most actions and decisions and problems should be able to be tied to the bottom dollar, and that means that you could calculate an ROI and then rank order different problems based on that ROI, and then whichever one gives us the highest ROI, that's what we focus on, given our limited resources. And if that's something that can't be solved for whatever reason, well, then we just go down the list. But at least we have a prioritizing. At least you have a solid prioritizing mechanism. So principle number one: have a goal, have a clear goal, and make sure that you know how to measure it. The second principle that I would talk about is the importance of attending to people. So as I mentioned, it was incumbent on us to go into the field as corporate associates and speak to the field associates. And there is definitely a stigma very similar to the dynamic between officers and enlisted, for anyone who's familiar with that in the military. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. It definitely depends on who you're speaking with. Depends on the type of corporate associate and the type of field associate. But either way, it was important for me to go out into the field and to listen to associates to understand what the problems were. And so when I'm talking about attending to people, I know I just said listening, but I think of attending to people in a broader sense than just listening. When I think about listening, it might just be hearing the words that someone says. It might just be hearing syllables or hearing utterances, but really your attention and your focus is on what you're going to say next, or maybe you're just completely ignoring it because you feel like you already know what the answer is, and so you're listening just to be polite. So that would be listening. And I would say that attending in its proper form would be to understand the goal of the person that you're speaking with, imagine that you have that same goal, and try to understand their emotions and feelings given that goal in the current context. And I think that that definition or conceptualization of attending helps people create better relationships and better interactions. And when people see that you are actually hearing them and attending to them, and you can feel what they feel to a certain degree, they will be more willing to open up to you, especially if you show a level of transparency that lets them know that it's okay to be transparent as well. And again, for what I was doing, I needed transparency. I needed to know what the actual problem was, or at least what the symptoms were, so that way I could do my best to conduct some sort of root cause analysis to really understand what's going on. So it's important to attend to people and not just listen to them. The last principle that I'll talk about is the importance of having a meritocratic culture. So again, when I think of a merit-based society or a merit-based organization, I think that there's an ultimate goal, and there are objective objective factors that predict the attainment of that ultimate goal. And to the degree that people participate in or develop those objective factors, they will be rewarded. What's great about a organization or a department and I know a team that is meritocratic is that, everywhere you go, there's a hierarchy, right? There's people at the top and there's people at the bottom. Well, in a meritocracy, the people at the bottom have hope. They believe that, okay, if I check these boxes, and I'm speaking about myself here, if I check these boxes and if I, don't mess up too bad, and if I develop myself and if I learn and, remain humble, then I will get promoted. And that was definitely, no organization is perfectly 100% meritocratic, but to the degree that an organization is meritocratic, I'm of the belief that that organization will succeed compared to ones that, perhaps they're focused on, keeping it in the family, or they're focused on image and reputation more in a corrupt sense, in a shallow sense. So I think that it's important for small teams to large organizations with hundreds of thousands of people to do their best to instill instantiate the conditions that facilitate a meritocratic culture. So that's it. I'm now in New York. That chapter is behind me. I'm very thankful for the Home Depot, and I'm very thankful for all my coworkers and the people who definitely my hiring manager and the one who brought me into the family, and those who helped me along the way. And I hope to take the things that I've learned working at that company to be better moving forward. So thanks everyone for listening.